Iran has vowed revenge against the US and Britain after the bombing that killed senior commanders of its powerful Revolutionary Guard. Just what's behind this escalation and what could it mean for negotiations over Iran's nuclear program? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mariam Namazi. Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is alleging Pakistani involvement in a bombing that killed several Revolutionary Guards. Suicide bombers attacked a group of highly ranked guards in southern Iran on Sunday. Well, at least 42 people were killed and dozens more were injured in the attack in Pishin in Baluchistan. A number of senior officers were among the dead, including the deputy commander of the Guards ground force. Some Iranian officials have claimed Western powers were behind the bombing. According to Iranian state media, a Sunni group called Jundallah claimed responsibility for that attack. President Ahmadinejad has claimed that security agents in Pakistan have been working with terrorist groups across the border. He's called on Pakistan to apprehend all those involved.
I ask the Pakistani government not to delay handing the main elements of this crime to us anymore. We are aware that, unfortunately, some Pakistani agents cooperate with them. We consider it our right to demand the vengeance of this bloodshed.
Well, earlier, Iran's Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani was quick to condemn the attack and praise the role of the Revolutionary Guards.
We express our condolences to the families of these dear ones, the Revolutionary Guards, and our martyr-nurturing nation. The intention of these terrorists was definitely to disrupt security in Sistan-Baluchistan province, because these people were working round the clock to bring security in the region. Such behaviors are aimed at preventing economic development from happening in Sistan-Baluchistan.
Well, joining us today are our guests in Tehran, Ghanbar Nadari, political editor of the Iran Daily newspaper. In Washington, D.C., Karim Sajadpour, an associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And in London, Dan Plesh, director of the Centre for International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS University. Mr. Plesh, if I can start with you, what is the significance of this attack?
Well, I think one has to be very concerned for the families of all those immediately concerned. We tend to overlook that. There have been attacks, though, of this kind sporadically over the last few years in different of the ethnic provinces of Iran. And I think one of the things that attacks of this nature can do is to make the outside world realize quite how Iran is a country of a variety of ethnic backgrounds, and that within them there are dissident and terrorist organizations. And I think this is perhaps, if we learn that lesson about the diversity of Iran, that will be perhaps the most important thing that the outside world can remind itself of. But clearly, this is a major attack on the heart of a key part of the Iranian state, part of the power base of the Iranian president, and that's why we're seeing, of course, such a violent political reaction.
Ghanbar Nadari, if we look at the circumstances, the attack took place during a meeting between local Shia and Sunni leaders, and that meeting was organized by the Revolutionary Guard. Could this bombing have been aimed at disrupting cooperation between the two communities?
Well, as your distinguished guest just made it clear, Iran is a country of variety, and the only thing that keeps this country together is democracy. Unfortunately, democracy is now under attack from the eastern parts of the country. We had this feeling about a few days ago that soon there will be some terrorist attacks against us in this country, because the situation in Pakistan has got out of control, and unfortunately, because of the presence of occupying forces in Afghanistan and now in Pakistan, this kind of instability and chaos is trying to inflict the most devastating blows to our country.
Karim Sajadpour, what's your take on this attack? It is one of the deadliest ever against the Revolutionary Guard. A top delegation was targeted. Will this incident escalate tensions between Tehran and the Baluchis?
Well, Sistan-Baluchistan has long been the most volatile province in Iran. It's got enormously high rates of unemployment, and because of this, the economic malaise, there's also a great deal of social malaise because of the the porous borders Sistan-Baluchistan has with Afghanistan and Pakistan, it's very easy to acquire cheap drugs in Sistan-Baluchistan. So it's got a very high incidence of drug addiction as well. And then inhabitants of Sistan-Baluchistan are primarily Sunni Baluchis instead of Persian Shiites, as the majority of the central government is. So I think that many people within Sistan-Baluchistan feel that they're discriminated against because they're not Persian Shiites, and they've been agitating for many years. And we've basically seen a tit-for-tat relationship between Jundullah, the extremist group which has claimed responsibility for the attack, and the central government. The central government imprisons and executes members of Jundullah, and then Jundullah vows retribution, and they attack members of the Revolutionary Guards.
Well, let me put that to Ran Badnadari. What you said, that this was an attack on Iran's democracy, but Iran has been accused by rights groups of mistreating its minorities, including the Baluchis in this province.
Well, I have to disagree with you. The people in the eastern part of the country most of them actually, are responsible for drug trafficking into Iran and from here to the European continent. Jundullah is the biggest drug cartel in the east of this country, and obviously Iran has taken a lot of effective measures to stop them from smuggling drugs into our borders. And the United Nations has also acknowledged that, as you know, more than 3,000 people get killed every year trying to defend our country from the chaos that the drug smugglers bring to us. No, I don't think that most of these people there are poor. No, the drug traffickers are among the richest strata in this country. If you just look around at this point in time, the biggest problem for us is not the American troop, the most dangerous risk that is at this point in time undermining our security is drug trafficking.
It's interesting that you say that, because that's not what the government in Iran is saying, is it? Dan Blesh, Tehran has accused the US of backing Jundullah to foment unrest in the country, a charge that Washington denies. What do you make of accusations that the West was involved in this attack somehow?
Well, on the one hand, it's easy to dismiss these allegations as just a sort of a knee-jerk blaming of the West rather than looking at internal problems. But on the other, I think looking at the Bush administration, this is the sort of thing that they certainly wouldn't have had any problem contemplating or countenancing as part of their effort to destabilize the regime in Iran. But at this point in time, unless one is buying into some idea, and I think it's probably a fantasy, of dissolute or dissident CIA factions and so on, or policies that were set up some time ago that haven't been stopped. Absent that sort of rather fantastic assumption, I think it's very hard to see that this would be an action that consciously would be initiated by the Brown government or the Obama administration, particularly because the Obama administration is trying very hard to turn over a new leaf. But that being said, of course, you just saw an article recently by the former weapons inspector David Kay saying that the Iranian policy on the nuclear dossier was such that, in his view, the US might be forced in a crisis just to destroy the whole of Iran. Quite categorical and horrific writing. So I think we have to understand that behind the scenes there is still a very strong pressure in the American bureaucracies towards a preparation for a very, very aggressive and violent policy towards Iran.
Well, Karim Sajjadpour, this is nothing new. We've seen Iran blame so-called foreign elements for its woes before. We saw it during the recent post-election violence in Iran. Do the majority of Iranians accept these arguments?
Well, I can't speak for the majority of Iranians. I think that those Iranians who have access to outside sources of information, whether it's satellite television or internet access, and their primary source of information is not official state television, I think they probably take these accusations with a grain of salt. The accusations that somehow the U.S. is behind everything that happens in Iran. What I would emphasize is that the Obama administration post-election, when millions of people took to the streets to protest the election results, they very carefully stayed out of Iran's internal happenings for fear that they would be scapegoated. So I think that if the United States really wanted to foment unrest in Iran, they would have taken the opportunity to do so after the elections.
Mr. Sajjad, let me ask you. You say that that the U.S. went to great lengths to be seen as not interfering in Iran's internal affairs when everything kicked off after the election. But let me ask you about a point that Dan Plesh touched on. Accusations of covert Western attempts to destabilize Iran's leadership. I mean, these aren't totally baseless, are they? I mean, there have been widespread reports in the past that the previous administration under George Bush did fund a covert intelligence program aimed at doing just that.
I think it's certainly within the realm of possibilities that during the Bush administration there were elements within the U.S. government that wanted to foment sectarian and ethnic unrest in Iran. There's not only accusations in Balochistan, but also in Kurdistan and in Khuzestan and Iranian Azerbaijan. So those accusations certainly existed. I'm not sure if they were ever proven 100%, but as I said, I think it's certainly within the realm of possibilities. But I can tell you now, living in Washington, D.C., that this certainly hasn't been the attitude of the Obama administration. I think from the day President Obama was inaugurated, he's tried to go to great lengths to change the tone and the context of the U.S.-Iran relationship.
Well, let me turn now to the issue of nuclear negotiations, which are going on right now in Vienna. Ghanbad Nadari, this attack comes as Iranian officials are meeting their Western counterparts in a second round of negotiations. How might this attack in Balochistan affect those talks?
I don't think this is going to affect the results of the nuclear talks. These are two separate issues that have nothing to do with each other. Obviously, the first one concerns the national security of this country that is going to be dealt with accordingly by our national security officials. The nuclear issue is totally a separate matter that another organization is in charge. Here, obviously, in Tehran, no organization tries to interfere in the affairs of the other. I don't think this is going to have any adverse impact on the results of the upcoming talks. But as you know, most of the people who have been arrested during the presidential protest about 2 months ago, and also some of the members of Jundullah who have been arrested, they have directly admitted to having direct links with American and British organizations, especially they have received finances from these countries.
Some of what you say to Dan Plesh. These are indeed two separate issues, the attack in Balochistan and the talks in Vienna. Nevertheless, we've been hearing some very strong language, strong rhetoric coming out of Tehran ahead of talks. It hasn't exactly been in the spirit of cooperation. Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani has said, we consider the recent terrorist measure the outcome of US measures. I mean, that's some very inflammatory rhetoric to be using ahead of negotiations.
It certainly is. I think we also should be cautious of what suspects say under interrogation. I suspect that in this country, let alone in others. So we should be cautious about what prisoners have been reported to have said. But I would hope that these two dossiers, these two issues can be looked at very separately. I'm sure that there's a lot of outrage that would be in this country if so many senior people had been murdered so brutally. And I hope that the rhetoric doesn't get in the way of the talks, which seem to have been going fairly well, despite the allegations of some people like David Kay, perhaps, I would hope, clutching at the straws of old-style allegations. I think that the decision to have some enrichment take place outside the country may well have a good scientific base in the difficulty that the Iranians may actually have had in carrying out some parts of the enrichment process. So hopefully there is still some hope for a soft landing here.
Well, it's interesting because it's now all that has been cast into doubt. Karim Sajjadpour, since the talks in Geneva, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and indeed other officials have hinted at buying enriched uranium for the Tehran reactor. Could the talks in Vienna be in danger of falling apart if Iran turns around and says, actually, you misunderstood us because we want to hold on to our low enriched uranium and simply buy what we need for our Tehran reactor abroad?
I think this meeting in Vienna is probably going to be more difficult than the meeting in Geneva a few weeks back. I think the first meeting in Geneva, Iran talked a lot about agreeing to things in principle. But I think from the US end and from certainly the European end as well, there was a concern or a recognition that when it came down to actually pinning Iran down and gaining concrete action, it was going to be more difficult. So I think certainly moving forward, the great expectations that were raised in the Geneva meeting may be somewhat lower this time around.
Ghanbar Naderi, what's your take on this? Because the crux of the deal in Geneva was very much Western officials interpreted the deal as being that Iran would allow low enriched uranium to be taken abroad and be enriched further, processed and then brought back. Is there a chance that Iran in these talks will simply refuse outright to transfer enriched uranium out of the country?
Not at all. I don't think this is going to happen. Iran has made it clear that it will fully cooperate with the international community and dispatch 5% enriched uranium to another country to be enriched up to 20%. But they have also made it clear that if the agreement is not fully fulfilled by the parties at the Geneva talks, and our 5% enriched uranium is not going to be enriched to 20%. They are going to enrich it themselves here in this country. But until then, they have full faith in their talks, and they have made it clear that this was a very, very successful meeting with the 5+1 group of nations, and they hope that they will deliver on their promises.
Karim Sajjadpour, what's your take on that? Because Iran seems to have been striking a somewhat defiant tone ahead of the meeting, saying it will not stop enriching uranium even if the country receives nuclear fuel from abroad. In fact, Ali Sherazdian said that buying nuclear fuel from abroad does not mean Iran will stop its uranium enrichment activities. Doesn't bode well.
Well, I actually don't think from the vantage point of the P5+1 that's the issue anymore. The issue is no longer enrichment. I think in Washington it's kind of an open secret that the Obama administration has moved the red lines of the Bush administration. The issue is no longer about enrichment. But I would say in Tehran, I'm not sure if an internal consensus has been yet reached to put on a more conciliatory face and try to reach some type of a modus vivendi with the United States. So another issue that should be put to the table, should be added, is that Iran's current supply of LEU, low enriched uranium, has in fact, it's not exactly, it's been tainted, it has a chemical taint to it. So they actually need to export that enriched uranium to France to have it purified. There's only one country that can do it, and that's France. So, in fact, it's not a tremendous concession, the fact that Iran is exporting this LEU because it's tainted chemically.
Dan Plesh, is there a chance that the Iranians might use... Sorry, go ahead.
It might not be so important from a technical perspective, but I think symbolically it is quite important. And I think we should be careful before pouring cold water on this initiative. But I'm interested if our colleague from Carnegie thinks that there are no longer any red lines from Washington with respect to Iran. If it isn't enrichment, what are the red lines for the Obama administration?
Karim, your response to that?
No, I simply think that enrichment is no longer the issue. They want to prevent Iran from weaponizing. They want to delay Iran's path to nuclear weapons capability. But the question is no longer enrichment. I think they just want to make it very difficult for Iran to weaponize and have as expansive an inspections regime as possible in Tehran to make sure that we know what's going on.
I'm sorry, but I
Tehran.
find something of, if you don't mind me saying so, I find something of a contradiction in what you're saying. On the one hand, you're saying that their enrichment is has been tainted, hasn't gone very well, they have to export it, and that somehow they shouldn't be given any credit for that. On the other hand, you're saying that the Obama administration has accepted that they can enrich to weapons grade quality. Now, those statements seem to me to be contradictory, but perhaps I've misheard you.
No, I think, you know, I'm not a technical expert, so I don't want to pretend to be one, but when I say that enrichment is no longer the issue, that's LEU, low enriched uranium, which is for a civilian nuclear energy program.
Okay,
certainly
well,
HEU,
we're running out of time, so
uranium,
let me just cut in there, if that's okay. Dan Plesh, just going back to the accusations made by the Iranian government in the wake of the attack in Baluchistan, even if the current talks in Vienna are not affected, looking ahead, do you think we could see Iran perhaps try to change the parameters of the debate over its nuclear program? Instead of always being on the defensive, will Iran go on the offensive by making accusations against the US that its own security is now being threatened?
Well, I think clearly the Iranians have always felt that way, and obviously, you know, if you're an Iranian, a culture which goes back to the dawn of human civilization, and a country next door, Pakistan, acquires nuclear weapons, which is a country of a number of areas which has actually only really been a country for less than a century. If I was an Iranian, I would think, well, why can't we have it too, with all due respect? So I think one has to look at these things a little bit more open-mindedly from how things might look at it if we were sitting in Tehran. I do, though, hope that we will see from Iran a revival of the ideas that came through the Swiss back in 2003, where it appeared, although these were rejected out of hand by Colin Powell's office, where it appeared at that time that they were prepared to join in with the incredibly important initiative in the Arab world, the Beirut Declaration, on negotiations and peace with Israel, and therefore see their way towards the ultimate recognition of Israel. And I think although there are different people in charge, if we saw a revival of that, which I think one could see taken up in Washington rather more enthusiastically, then that might be a very, very creative way forward.
Well, Dan Plesh in London, thank you very much. Karim Sajjadpour in Washington, D.C., and Ranbar Naderi in Tehran. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.